We welcome you all to participate with us in this devotion of the Holy Rosary. As we are in this month of May and a choir has especially initiated to pray the Holy Rosary before we celebrate the Mass, so that we may closely bond with our Mother, whom we believe as the strongest intercessor, whom we believe as one of the most faithful devotee of our Lord. May this rosary help us to get more closer to her, to get more closer to Christ. Before we begin, I request everyone participating to put your phones in silent mode. I would like to read a small introduction on how Rosary was very dear to Padre Pio. Padre Pio's love became an endless, ardent, faithful prayer. Who could possibly count the rosaries that he recited over the course of his marvelous life? He was the friar of the rosary. He always carried it in his hand or on his arm as if it were a bracelet or a shield. He had other rosaries under the pillow of his bed on the bureau in his cell. He called the rosary his weapon. One night, when he was sick in bed, he was unable to find his rosary beads. So he called Father Onorato of San Giovanni Rotondo, saying, "Young man, get me my weapon. Give me my weapon." The rosary was his favorite prayer. He recited it continually. He devoured the rosary with insatiable hunger. It was the prayer that he had learned from the Virgin herself. The Virgin of Pompeii, Lourdes and Fatima, as a means of obtaining the conversion and salvation of sinners. At certain hours, he would walk down the central path of the Friary garden, absorbed in his suffering and his love, while the beads slipped through the fingers of his wounded hands. In his pockets, he carried rosary beads, which he would give to anyone who requested a set. Even today, people still hold these dear, saying, "This is his rosary, which Padre Pio gave me. I treasure it with all my heart." Let us make sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Mary, losing and finding the child Jesus. The Mother of God, who looked for her Son so anxiously when he was lost, through no fault of her own, and experienced such great joy in finding him, will help us retrace our steps and put right whatever may be necessary when, because of our carelessness or our sins, we have been unable to recognize Christ. With her help, we will know the happiness of holding him in our arms once more and telling him we will never lose him again. Let's begin with the hymn.
only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell. On the third day he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From there he will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen.
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
As today is Thursday, we'll meditate on the mystery of light. Pope Pius V established a standard 15 mysteries of the Rosary based on long-standing custom. These groups the mysteries in 3 sets: the joyful mysteries, the sorrowful mysteries, and the glorious mysteries. During 2002, Pope John Paul II said that it is fitting that a new set of 5 be added, termed the luminous mysteries, bringing the total number of mysteries to 20. The new mysteries of the Rosary, called Mysteries of Light, are a message of enlightenment in their own right. They are called Mysteries of Light or Luminous Mystery because they shed light on who Jesus Christ is. He is a light figure. He brings light into the world. He understands his public ministry, indeed, his whole person and life as a mission of light. As written in John chapter 9, verse 5, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Being the light of the world, Jesus is our true liberator. The first mystery of light, baptism in the Jordan. O Mama, in this mystery, we pray for all the newly baptized Christians in the world. Dear Mama, cover them in your mantle, protecting them from harm and danger in their faith. Help them nurture their faith in Christ and build a stronghold in the Word of God. May the Church enable them with the surrounding necessary for them to know Christ more. Mother Mary, please intercede. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy. Amen.
Woman of faith, enable us to retrace our steps and never to lose Jesus. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
The second mystery of light, the wedding feast of Cana. In this decade, Mama, please specially do intercede for all those people who are suffering from sickness, and especially who are in the verge of their lives. Mama, especially intercede for them that they might reignite their faith while they are bedridden, that they can find the best time for prayers. For this, we ask you for intercession. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy. Amen.
Women of faith, enable us to retrace our steps and never to lose Jesus. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Third mystery of light, the proclamation of the kingdom of God. We pray for all the hard-hearted person in our family and in our friend circle that they can experience the conversion of heart, that they can strive for eternal life and follow you. Mama Mary, do intercede for this intention. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy. Amen.
Woman of faith, enable us to retrace our step and never to lose Jesus. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Fourth mystery of light, the Transfiguration. Lord, in this mystery, I pray for all the Christians who fail to believe that during the Holy Mass, the simple bread and wine is being transformed into your body and blood, that you are present in that host. Lord, send your Holy Spirit upon them, that they might understand this mystery. Provide them with proper guidance. For this I pray intention. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy. Amen.
women of faith, enable us to retrace our steps and never to lose Jesus. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Fifth mystery of light, the institution of the Eucharist. Lord Jesus, we pray for the unity of the Church and all the leaders of our Church so that they may be able to bring love, peace and unity among all the members of this big family. We also remember each Christian family in this church, especially families that are struggling with faith, members of the family who are right now struggling with faith. Lord, remember all those people who have received your body and blood at some point of their life, believing in you, but right now they are at a phase that they are not able to hold on to you, hold on to that belief that they had. Like you converted your body and blood, like you converted the bread and wine into your body and blood and asked us to receive you every time in faith. Help those people are struggling. Help them to see who you are. Mama Mary, please intercede for each of your child. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy. Amen.
Woman of faith, enable us to retrace our steps and never to lose Jesus. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Let us say Hail Holy Queen together. Hail Holy Queen,
Mother of mercy, hail our life, our sweetness, and our hope. To thee do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To thee do we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping in this valley of tears. Turn then, the most gracious advocate, thine eyes of mercy towards us, and after this our exile, show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus. O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary. Amen.
let us all kneel for the litany of the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
Christ have mercy.
Christ have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
Your response will be Christ graciously hear us. Christ hear us.
Christ graciously hear us.
Your response will be have mercy on us. God the Father of heaven.
Have mercy on us.
God the Son Redeemer of the world.
Have mercy on us.
God the Holy Spirit.
Have mercy on us.
Holy Trinity one God.
Have mercy on us.
Your response will be pray for us. Holy Mary.
Pray for us.
Holy Mother of God.
Pray for us.
Holy Virgin of Virgins.
Pray for us.
Mother of Christ.
Pray for us.
Mother of divine grace.
Pray for us.
Mother most pure.
Pray for us.
Mother most chaste.
Pray for us.
Mother inviolate.
Pray for us.
Mother undefiled.
pray for us.
Mother most amiable,
Pray for us.
Mother most admirable,
Pray for us.
Mother of good counsel,
Pray for us.
Mother of our Creator,
Pray for us.
Mother of our Savior,
Pray for us.
Virgin most prudent,
Pray for us.
Virgin most venerable,
Pray for us.
Virgin most renowned,
Pray for us.
Virgin most powerful,
Pray for us.
Virgin most merciful,
Pray for us.
Virgin most faithful,
Pray for us.
Mirror of justice,
Pray for us.
seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
cause of our joy,
Pray for us.
spiritual vessel,
Pray for us.
vessel of honor,
Pray for us.
singular vessel of devotion,
Pray for us.
mystical rose,
Pray for us.
Tower of David,
Pray for us.
Tower of Ivory,
Pray for us.
House of Gold,
Pray for us.
Ark of the Covenant,
Pray for us.
Gate of Heaven,
Pray for us.
Morning Star,
Pray for us.
Health of the sick,
Pray for us.
Refuge of sinners,
Pray for us.
Comforter of the afflicted,
Pray for us.
Help of Christians,
Pray for us.
Queen of angels,
Pray for us.
Queen of patriarchs,
Pray for us.
Queen of prophets,
Pray for us.
Queen of apostles,
Pray for us.
Queen of martyrs,
Pray for us.
Queen of confessors,
Pray for us.
Queen of virgins,
Pray for us.
Queen of all saints,
Pray for us.
Queen conceived without original sin,
Pray for us.
Queen assumed into heaven,
Pray for us.
Queen of the most holy rosary,
Pray for us.
Queen of peace,
Pray for us.
Queen of family.
Pray for us.
Your response will be, spare us, O Lord. Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world,
Spare us, O Lord.
graciously hear us, O Lord. Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world,
Graciously hear us, O Lord.
your response will be, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world,
Have mercy on us,
pray for us, O Holy Mother of God.
that we may be made worthy of the promises of Christ.
Let us pray. Grant, we beseech thee,
O Lord God, that we, thy servants, may enjoy perpetual health of mind and body, and by the glorious intercession of the Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, be delivered from present sorrow, and enjoy eternal happiness through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Let us say the Memorare together. Remember, O
Most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen.
Let us say a special prayer by Pope Francis during this time of pandemic COVID-19. O Mary,
You
You
shine
shine
continuously
on our journey as a sign of salvation and hope. We entrust ourselves to you. Help of the sick, who at the foot of the cross were united with Jesus' suffering and persevered in your faith. Protectress of the Roman people, you know our needs, and we know that you will provide, so that, as at Cana in Galilee, joy and celebration may return after this time of trial. Help us, Mother of Divine Love, to conform ourselves to the will of the Father and to do what Jesus tells us. For he took upon himself our sufferings and burdened himself with our sorrows to bring us through the cross to the joy of the resurrection. Amen.
let us sing a hymn.
Holy Virgin, by God's decree, you were called eternally, that He could give His Son to our race. Pray for us.
Saint Faustina,
Pray for us.
Saint Mother Teresa,
Pray for us.
Saint John Paul II,
Pray for us.
Saint Jose Maria Escriva,
Pray for us.
Saint Dominic.
Pray for us.
Let us make sign of the cross.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, friends, for joining with us in this Holy Rosary prayer. We'll have the virtual Holy Mass now after few minutes as we prepare our altar. Kindly participate with us in this virtual Holy Mass as well. And we also request you to invite your friends and family members to join us to pray the Holy Rosary every day at 5:30, followed by the virtual Holy Mass. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord, for being with us each and every moment. Thank you, Lord, for giving us this good health. We are able to see, we are able to listen to this music. We are able to breathe. And Lord, as we are here once again, please help us that we may cling to your love. The love which redeemed me, the love which became salvation for all of us, a love with full of hope. Lord my God, it's high time that we are not able to enact with your love. In this Mass, Lord, please help our weak mind, our weak body, our weak soul to enhance that love which poured out on the Mount Calvary, on that cross. Yes, Lord my God, during this virtual Holy Mass, I want to offer each and every soul so that we may be purified by your holy blood. Our mind will be purified. Our body will be cleansed with your holy blood. Our conscience may think about what is right and wrong with your holy blood. And may the Spirit strengthen and conquer our mind, body and soul. Yes, Lord my God, be with us and help us so that we can fight our weaknesses and we can stand for your love which was shed on the cross. Let's make sign of the cross in the name of Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's rise for entrance.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
The peace of the Lord be with you.
and with your
And as we
spirit.
have placed ourselves before the Lord on this feast day of Saint Matthias, knowing that just like Saint Matthias, we are not perfect. You were sent to heal the contrite of heart. Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
You came to call sinners. Christ, have mercy.
Christ, have mercy.
You are seated at the right hand of the Father to intercede for us. Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have
May Almighty God have mercy on us, forgive us our sins, and bring us to everlasting life.
Amen. Sing to God a song of glory. Peace He brings to people on earth. Worship we the King of heaven. Praise and bless His holy name. Glory, glory, sing His glory. Glory to our God on high. Sing to Christ the Father's love. Jesus, Lord and Lamb of God. Hear our prayer, O Lord, have mercy. You who bear the sin of all. Glory, glory, sing His glory. Glory to our God on high. Sing to Christ the Lord and Savior, seated there at God's right hand. Hear our prayer, O Lord, have mercy. You alone, the Holy One. Glory, glory, sing His glory. Glory to our God on high. Glory sing to God the Father. Glory to His Holy Son. Glory to the Holy Spirit. Glory to the Three in One. Glory, glory, sing His glory. Glory to our God on high.
And let us pray. O God, who assigned Saint Matthias a place in the college of apostles, grant us, through his intercession, that, rejoicing at how your love has been allotted to us, we may merit to be numbered among the elect. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God forever and ever. Amen.
In today's first reading, we'll hear how the 11 apostles, they chose Matthias.
First reading, Acts of the Apostles, chapter 1, verses 15 to 17 and 20 to 26. In those days, Peter stood up among the believers. Together, the crowd numbered about 120 persons, and said, "Friends, the scripture had to be fulfilled, which the Holy Spirit, through David, foretold concerning Judas, who became a guide for those who arrested Jesus. For he was numbered among us and was allotted his share in this ministry. For it is written in the book of Psalms, 'Let his homestead become desolate, and let there be no one to live in it. And let another take his position of overseer.' So one of the men who have accompanied us during all the time that the Lord Jesus went in and out among us, beginning from the baptism of John until the day when he was taken up from us, One of these must become a witness with us to his resurrection. So they proposed two, Joseph and Barsabas, who was Joseph called Barsabas, who was also known as Justus, and Matthias. Then they prayed and said, Lord, you know everyone's heart. Show us which one of these two you have chosen to take the place in this ministry and apostleship from which Judas turned aside to go to his own place. And they cast lots for them. And the lot fell on Matthias, and he was added to the 11 apostles. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Lord will count him among his people. The Lord will count him among his people. Praise, O servants of the Lord, praise the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord, from this time on and forevermore. The Lord will count him among his people. From the rising of the sun to its setting, the name of the Lord is to be praised. The Lord is high above all nations, and his glory above the heavens. The Lord will count him among his people. Who is like the Lord our God, who is seated on high, who looks far down on the heavens and the earth. The Lord will count him among his people.
Let's all rise for acclamation.
Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. I have chosen you from the world, says the Lord, to go and bear fruit that will last. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
In today's Gospel reading, we'll be hearing that our Lord, He gives His only commandment, that is, to love one another as He has loved.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus said to his disciples, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you, so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend. You are my friends, if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appoint you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask in his name. I am giving you these commandments, so that you may love one another. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
When we look at the first reading from Acts, we, at least I do, I go, huh? They're gambling, they're just pulling lots. It's like a roll of the dice, and we're choosing people who's going to be who's going to step in the place of Judas Iscariot. And we don't know, it says they went by lot, they took lots between Joseph and Matthias. And on first sight, it really kind of throws me off. Because they say, is this kind of a discernment? And I call it actually donkey discernment. And the donkey discernment might be okay if I have to choose between vanilla ice cream and chocolate ice cream. But if it is about people, I'm not sure. But they more than likely, they did have a discernment process. There were 120 people together. And I presume there were discussions, and who is the best person to take the spot of Judas Iscariot? And they came up with two equal choices. So let God decide in chance. So it's not that they just randomly chose Matthias, but they said, let God decide. But this, I would not recommend it too often, only in special cases. But I use the word donkey discernment, and that comes from the life of St. Ignatius of Loyola, when he still was a little headstrong, and he first learned about God, and he met a person on the road. He was riding a donkey, and this other person was riding a donkey too, and this person was really saying some bad words about the Mother of God, and St. Ignatius was very upset. And they came to a V in the road, and St. Ignatius said, well, the donkey will have to decide if I'm going to kill this person or if this person will live. If I go to the left, if the donkey goes to the left, I have to kill this person, and if a donkey goes to the right, the person will live. Bad discernment in today's world, you might end up in jail. And St. Ignatius of Loyola is also the founder of the Jesuits. As he went deeper in his prayer life, he came up with the Ignatian spirituality, and of course also the discernment of spirits. Discerning, looking at our lives and making decisions with God, and not just looking at chance. Yes, good. It was good that the donkey listened to the Holy Spirit when the donkey chose to go to the right and not so telling Ignatius to go after this person. But discernment of spirits, discernment in our lives, it is so important. And it takes a prayer life to really work with that, and conversations with people I know and who I can trust. So often people come to me and they say, God told me that, I don't know, God told me I had to do this or that. Okay, and I go, how do you know it's God? How do you know it's not the the angel of light, the Satan. How do you know? Because the angel of light, as it says, the angel of light can come like it's God. And so discernment, especially when we make big decisions, even for a couple, how many children we will have. Will I marry this particular person? What if I have a choice between different jobs? Or if I get a promotion but we have to move as a family? It takes a lot of discernment. And yes, it takes making that decision with God, asking, inviting the Holy Spirit into that. And so, into that, yes, God might speak to my heart and say, yes, I strongly feel that this is the decision I have to make. But St. Ignatius says, whoa, hang on, not too quick. What do trusted people in my life who I really trust and who will be honest with me, what do they have to say? And even after I have made a decision and I came to the conclusion this is what I have to do, then it still has to be tested. It is like a couple coming together and they have an engagement. And the engagement ring is bought and this beautiful ring and there's a party, but they're not married yet. Because in that period between engagement and marriage, they again have to discern, is this really from God? Is this person, can I live with this person for the rest of my life for better or worse? Is this really of God? It has to be confirmed. And so discernment takes a lot of time. In the Acts of Apostles, they did do a good discernment, but they came up with two equal choices and then they made what I call the donkey discernment. But it is not just rolling the dice and making a decision. So Ignatian spirituality is really a spirituality for everyday living. Amen. And so let us bring our prayers before the Lord. And let us pray for all those in the daily TV Mass community who have asked to be included in our prayer intention book, especially those asking for peace in their families. We pray to the Lord. We pray in thanksgiving for all Christians and people of goodwill who quietly build the kingdom of God right here on earth, each in their own unique way. We pray to the Lord. We pray for all those in our world who live in grinding poverty, that generous hearts will continue to reach out in order to relieve some of that hardship. We pray to the Lord. And let us pray especially in these times for all those who have lost their employment during this pandemic, and that they will find consolence in God and hopefully new work. For this we pray to the Lord. And for these prayers, and the prayers in the silence of our own hearts, we lift them up to you, Lord. Amen.
Love.
my sisters and brothers, that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable to God, the Almighty Father.
May the Lord accept the sacrifice at your hands for the praise and the glory of His name, for our good and the good of all.
Receive, O Lord, the offerings of your church, reverently presented for the feast of Saint Matthias, and through him strengthen us by the power of your grace, through Christ, O Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit,
Lift up your hearts.
lift them up to the Lord.
Let us give thanks to the Lord our God.
It is right and just.
It is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation, always and everywhere, to give you thanks, Lord, Holy Father, Almighty and eternal God. For you, eternal shepherd, do not desert your flock, but through the blessed apostles, watch over it and protect it always, so that it may be governed by those you have appointed shepherds, to lead it in the name of your Son. And so, with angels and archangels, with thrones and dominions, and with all the hosts and powers of heaven, we sing the hymn of your glory as we acclaim. You are indeed holy, O Lord, the fount of all holiness. Make holy, therefore, these gifts, we pray, by sending down your Spirit upon them like the dewfall, so that they may become for us the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. At the time he was betrayed and entered willingly into his passion, he took bread, and giving you thanks, broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body, which will be given up for you."
My Lord, my God.
In a similar way, when supper was ended, he took the chalice, and once more, giving thanks, he gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it, for this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for many, for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me."
My Lord, my God.
The mystery of faith.
We proclaim your death, O Lord, and profess your resurrection until you come again.
Therefore, as we celebrate the memorial of his death and resurrection, we offer you, Lord, the bread of life and the chalice of salvation, giving thanks that you have held us worthy to be in your presence and minister to you. Humbly we pray that, partaking of the body and blood of Christ, we may be gathered into one by the Holy Spirit. Remember, Lord, your church spread throughout the world and bring her to the fullness of charity, together with Francis our Pope, Thomas our Bishop, the Canadian bishops, the clergy, and the entire people you have called your own. Remember also our sisters and brothers who have fallen asleep in the hope of the resurrection, and all who have died in your mercy. Welcome them into the light of your face. Have mercy on us all, we pray, that with the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, with Blessed Joseph, our spouse, with the blessed apostles and all the saints who have pleased you throughout the ages, we may merit to be co-heirs to eternal life, and may praise and glorify you through your Son, Jesus Christ. Through him, and with him, and in him, O God, Almighty Father, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, all glory and honor is yours forever and ever. Amen. And at the Saviour's command, and formed by divine teaching, we dare to say,
Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil.
Deliver us, Lord, we pray, from every evil. Graciously grant peace in our days, that by the help of your mercy we may be always free from sin and safe from all distress, as we await the blessed hope and the coming of our Saviour, Jesus Christ. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours now and forever. Lord Jesus Christ, who said to your apostles, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give you," look not on our sins, but on the faith of your church, and graciously grant her peace and unity in accordance with your will, who live and reign forever and ever. Amen. The peace of the Lord be with you always. And let us offer each other a sign of peace.
Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world.
Have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world. Have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world. Grant us peace.
Behold the Lamb of God. Behold him who takes away the sins of the world. Blessed are those called to the supper of the Lamb. Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul shall be healed. May the body of Christ keep you safe for eternal life. May the blood of Christ keep you safe for eternal life.
As we are having this virtual Holy Mass, we won't be able to receive the communion. So let's remember our first Holy Communion. How we were excited, how we were happy, how we were having that joy. Maybe it was for something new coming into our life. We were dressed well, we were excited, and yes, it's for Jesus, the one really loved us and transformed himself to that body, to that bread and wine, so that while we will take him, we can come closer to him, we may be transformed. So let's remember that moment when we received Jesus. And remembering those few moments, let's say this act of spiritual communion. O Immaculate Queen of heaven and earth, Mother of God and mediator of every grace,
I believe that your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, is truly, really, and substantially contained in the most holy sacrament. I love him above all things and long to receive him in my heart. Since now I cannot receive him sacramentally, be so good to place him spiritually in my soul and never permit me to be separated from him. Amen.
Amen.
Lord, you are my everything. Lord,
Thank you, Lord, Almighty Father,
everlasting God,
for having been pleased through no merit of mine, but of your great mercy alone, to feed me, a sinner, and your unworthy servant, with the precious body and blood of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. I pray that this Holy Communion may not be for my judgment and condemnation, but for my pardon and salvation. Let this Holy Communion be to me an armor of faith and a shield of goodwill, a cleansing of all vices, and a rooting out of all evil desires. May it increase love and patience, humility and obedience, and all virtues. May it be a firm defense against the evil designs of all my visible and invisible enemies, a perfect quieting of all the desires of soul and body. May this Holy Communion bring about a perfect union with you, the one true God, and at last enable me to reach eternal bliss when you will call me. I pray that you bring me, a sinner, to the indescribable feast, where you, with your Son and the Holy Spirit, after your saints, true light, full blessedness, everlasting joy, and perfect happiness, through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. A prayer for priests of Saint Therese of Lisieux. O Jesus, eternal priest, keep your priests within the shelter of your sacred heart. When I may touch them, keep unstained their anointed hands, which daily touch your sacred body. Keep unsullied their lips, daily purpled with your precious blood. Keep pure and unearthly their hearts, sealed with the sublime mark of the priesthood. Let your holy love surround them and shield them from the world's contagion. Bless their labors with abundant fruit, and may the souls to whom they minister be their joy and consolation, here and in heaven, their beautiful and everlasting crown. Amen.
And let us pray. Never cease, O Lord, we pray, to fill your family with divine gifts, and through blessed Matthias' intercession for us, graciously admit us to a share in the lot of the saints in light. Through Christ, O Lord. Amen. And the Lord be with you. Please bow your heads for a final blessing. May God, who has granted you to stand firm on the apostolic foundation, graciously bless you through the glorious merits of the holy apostle Matthias. Amen. And may he who endowed you with the teaching and examples of the apostles make you under the protection witness to be truth before all. Amen. So that through the intercession of the apostles you may inherit the eternal homeland, for by their teaching you possess firmness of faith. Amen. And may the blessings of Almighty God, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit come down on you and remain with you forever. Amen. Go in peace, glorifying the Lord by your life.
Thanks be to God.
Mother of Jesus and Mother of lowliness, bearing the light of the world, radiant with glory, the glory of Jesus conceived by the Spirit of God.
thank you, Lord my God, for this beautiful moment. And thank you for giving us the Word of God as for today. It's all about discernment, Lord. It's always about discernment while we are able to hear your call. But Lord my God, many a times we want to walk according to your call, but it's very tough. But Lord, you have given us opportunities, you have given us ways. How can we come together? Not alone, but come together. And that's what in first reading you showed us. How 11 apostles were once again 12 with Matthias. Yes, Lord my God, it's very less that in our church the Holy Spirit is being listened. Many of the time the people, mind and body comes first. But then also your merciful heart waits, because you are the creator of love. Yes, Lord my God, as you gave that greatest commandment, love one another, it's greater than any weapon, it's greater than any creation. Lord my God, help each and every one of us so that we may be able to understand this one word, love. And my Lord's Mother and my Mother, Mama Mary, do intercede for us, because you have seen that love while it was being created in your womb, while he performed his first miracle, while he was on the way to Calvary. Mama, please help us so that we may be able to know that love, we may be able to grow in that love. Mama, help us that we may be knitted, we may be united in love. Please, Mama, intercede for this intercession with all the angels and saints. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Let's all say the Memorare. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. O Queen of Heaven, rejoice now. Alleluia. Rejoice, for he who merit though despair. Alleluia. He is risen as he foretold. Alleluia. Pray for us to the Father. Alleluia. Rejoice and be glad, O Virgin Mary. Alleluia. For the Lord has truly risen. Alleluia. Let us pray. O God, you deign to give joy to the world through the resurrection of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Grant, we beseech you, that through his mother, the Virgin Mary, we may obtain the joys of everlasting life. Through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Virgin Mary,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
Saint Faustina,
Pray for us.
Saint Mother Teresa,
Pray for us.
Saint John Paul II,
Pray for us.
Saint Jose Maria Escriva.
Pray for us.
Let's make sign of the cross in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, friends, for joining us in this virtual Holy Mass. Have a blessed evening ahead. Stay safe and take precautions. We are in the month of May, which is devoted to Mother Mary, and AIS Choir has taken the initiative to pray the daily rosary at 5 o'clock in the evening. Sometimes it's technical issues and the weather conditions here. We are not able to start at 5 o'clock. But yes, we are doing the rosary every day. Maybe it will be late. And if you are live, then please do join us.